The first sign that something had shifted came quietly. It was not a memo, not a meeting, not even a raised eyebrow from my manager. It was the red blink of a door refusing to recognize me. I had walked the same corridor every morning for years. I could find the server room door with my eyes closed. I knew the rhythm of the card reader's green light, the soft click that felt like the building exhaling. But that morning it blinked red twice, and then it stayed red as if it had decided my story had reached its end. I pressed my badge again. The machine beeped in a flat, humorless tone. Behind me, the guard cleared his throat. He was new, and he still believed that systems obey rules. He looked from the monitor to me with a puzzled frown. "It says your profile is active," he muttered. "Try again." I tried again. The same denial, the same red. My reflection in the small window looked tired but not surprised. "Sometimes systems learn to forget," I told him. He laughed because he thought I was joking. I was not. The building had begun to erase me long before the badge stopped working. Through the glass, I saw the racks lined in neat rows, their lights flickering like distant cities. 17 years of my life lived inside those machines. Nights spent calming storms in the payment cluster. Weekends writing code to patch holes no one else could see. That hum had been my constant companion, and now I was locked out like a stranger at my own door. 2 engineers from my team turned the corner. One raised his hand to greet me, then froze when he noticed the red blink. The other looked at the floor as if reading invisible instructions. When someone is being quietly removed, people get very interested in the floor. I forced a smile. "The east rack needs reordering," I said. "The failover ran hot last night. Do not trust the curve." They both nodded quickly. One of them, the youngest, gave me a nervous smile. "Always 2 steps ahead, Cameron." I wanted to say I used to be 6 steps ahead. I wanted to say I had felt this day creeping closer for months, but I kept my smile. There are moments when speaking the truth out loud only makes it heavier. The guard tapped his keyboard again. His face flushed. "I am sorry, MS Cross." The change came from human resources at midnight. Global security upgrade. "It says profile merge, profile merge." The phrase was so clean it sounded surgical. Of course it was midnight. Quiet hour. The hour when decisions slip in and pretend they had always been true. "Thank you," I told him and walked away before he could apologize again. Apologies here were like wallpaper, a cover that hid the cracks underneath. The elevator mirrored me as it rose. I adjusted my badge on its lanyard, trying not to think about the mug that had disappeared from my desk last week. My old blue one with white letters, world-class problem solver. On Monday there had been a replacement waiting. White ceramic with the company logo, a gesture that felt like a scoop of dirt on a grave. The executive floor was already buzzing. Doors open, laptops alive, voices rehearsing confidence. Sienna Vale stood in the common area, tablet in hand, posture sharp enough to cut glass. She was young, brilliant, ruthless, and newly crowned as head of human resources. "Morning, Cameron," she called brightly. "Did you see the note about the security refresh? Long overdue. Zero trust is the way forward." I kept my voice steady. I could not get into the server room. She tilted her head as if I had just confirmed her experiment. "That is interesting. Some doors are down while we roll out the upgrade. You can file an exception request." "Exceptions take days," I said. "Then plan for days," she replied smoothly. "I am hosting a town hall in 20 minutes. New structures, new possibilities. You should be there." She walked away before I could answer. At my desk, the air felt thinner. Notifications cascaded onto my screen. Requests I could not approve, dashboards moved to new owners, invitations to meetings I once led now hosted by unfamiliar names. My chair felt colder, as if the building itself wanted me gone. The town hall auditorium was packed. Screens glowed with the company logo above a slogan in friendly font, "Evolve to Win." I sat by the aisle. Always by the aisle in case I needed to leave quickly. Sienna took the stage like it had been built for her. She spoke of growth, efficiency, innovation. She unveiled a new body, the Innovation Council, a select group who would remove obstacles and accelerate progress. The old structures, she said, had slowed us down. The new model would clear the way. Around me, people nodded the way people nod when it is safer to nod. My phone buzzed 3 times. "Update to your role. Knowledge transition template. Invitation." The invitations always came last, polite little notes that meant the door was already closed. I raised my hand. She saw me, smiled wider. "Who handles the payments cluster when it crashes at 3 a.m., I asked. A few chuckles rippled. Everyone knew the cluster liked to test our patience. "Automation will," she replied smoothly. "Workflows, escalation triggers, no more reliance on personality-driven support." Personality, I thought, is the word you use when you want to erase experience. I appreciate automation, I said aloud, but it does not calm a client on the phone at 4 in the morning. It does not talk down a partner from panic because you remember their child's name. We can take this offline, she said with a smile that had not reached her eyes. Of course, I said and sat down. My phone buzzed again. Performance improvement plan. The subject line sat there like a verdict. I stayed in my seat when the crowd filed out. The room smelled faintly of burnt sugar, the smell of people pretending nothing had happened. My manager avoided my eyes. I spared him the guilt and smiled. Back at my desk, I opened a folder I had not touched in years. I had called it Vault back when I thought the name was funny. It was not funny now. Inside were contracts, old notes, emails that should have been deleted but were not. Somewhere in these pages was the truth. The kind of truth you do not need until the lights begin to lie. I scrolled line after line until my eyes blurred. And then I stopped. A file from 2006. The year we were still sitting on crates in a rented room. My signature, younger and more hopeful. Pages of terms and clauses, the language of survival, my breath caught. The screen dimmed, but I leaned closer. There, in the middle of ordinary words, something waited for me. I whispered to myself, almost without sound. There you are. I did not open champagne music in my head or whisper a victory speech to the empty room. I just scrolled. The cursor moved like a careful finger along a line of text that pretended to be boring. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous decisions often hide in sentences that look like they are only here to keep the page from falling over. Before I read all of it, I stood and walked to the window. The glass threw the river back at me in silver streaks. I wanted the distance of a breath. I wanted to see something that was not a screen. On the street below, a courier coasted through a yellow light and grinned when he made it. Small acts of defiance. I liked that. I went back to my chair. A ping, not from my computer, from my phone. A calendar update that said Leadership Sync has changed rooms. The new room was one floor above me, the floor where the doors have thicker frames and the coffee is brewed in machines that make a sound like a small airplane. I thought about accepting just to sit in the back and let my presence remind them that work has a face. I did not. I forwarded the invite to my personal account with a tiny note for myself. Keep it. Remember the way they moved it. Another ping, performance improvement plan reminder. I opened it this time. The document used my name as if it were a variable dropped into a template that had already been written. It spoke in sentences that had no fingerprints. Resistance to new processes. Difficulty aligning with innovation partners. Opportunities to demonstrate flexibility. The date was 2 weeks in the past. It claimed I had been informed and that I had chosen not to respond. I typed a short reply to legal. I have no record of receipt on that date. I require original send time and delivery proof. I kept the tone crisp and steady. No anger. Anger can be dismissed as style. Evidence cannot. My team chat window flickered with small squares of worry and affection. Are you okay? Do you want us in the war room after lunch? Did you see the tickets got rerouted to Council Q? I told them I was fine. I told them to meet me at the small conference room with the old map of the city on the wall. I told them to bring their notebooks, not their feelings. We would use those later. They arrived with the quiet energy of people who have been pretending all morning that the ground is not moving. I let them sit and look at me. The table felt like a raft. The room felt like water. I drew a rectangle on the whiteboard and wrote payments inside it. Under that I wrote 3 more boxes. Auth, reconcile, certs. A simple diagram. A reminder that the world is still made of a few important things. We are going to be useful, I said. We are going to make sure that when code breaks at midnight, there is a sentence somewhere that tells a tired person what to do next. We are also going to keep notes about what we are asked to do and how. You do not have to decide anything beyond that today. They nodded. The youngest spoke first. What about the council queue? They are already pulling our requests. We will give them what they ask for, I said. We will also send ourselves a copy every time our work is renamed as someone else's efficiency. There were soft laughs. They were the kind that happen when humor is the only polite way to say you feel like crying. Another hand. What happens to you? The question was careful. The eyes were not. I looked at them the way you look at people you would stand between and a fire. Something is coming, I said. I will handle it. You will keep the lights on. If you need me, I will be reachable. If something breaks in a way no one has ever seen before, check the runbooks. If the runbooks fail you, call me anyway. I have never minded being woken up. They smiled in the way a person smiles when they decide to believe you because the alternative is too hard. I sent them back to their desks with tasks that sounded ordinary. Document the secret handshake between the gateway and the vendor. List every certificate with an expiry inside 90 days. Export the queue of deferred reconciliations and label the ones that will explode if ignored. Ordinary is a kind of spell. Sometimes it keeps the wolves outside the door until you are ready. When the room was empty, I erased the rectangles and stood with the marker in my hand. My reflection in the glass door looked like a person who had chosen a fight. The feeling did not scare me. It steadied me. I capped the marker and went to find coffee. The kitchen smelled like the lemon cleaner the night crew used. A handful of people hovered around the machine like students who did not want to go to class. I filled a paper cup and held it for warmth. In the reflection on the microwave door, I saw Sienna approach. She kept her tablet to her chest the way some people keep a book in a crowded subway. "You are a presence," she said cheerfully, as if she were complimenting a plant for thriving in poor light. "I appreciate your questions earlier. They are exactly the kind of legacy mindset we need to evolve beyond." "Evolve beyond," I repeated, as if tasting a spice I did not recognize. She lowered her voice a fraction. "Everyone here knows you have given a lot. The company will recognize that. The transition will be respectful. Respect would have been letting me into the room I built," I said. She smiled again, a smaller one. "Sometimes respect looks like planning. I would be happy to connect you with a coach who helps leaders reframe change." I pictured a stranger on a video call telling me to own my narrative. I pictured myself closing the laptop without a goodbye. I took a sip of coffee and met her eyes. "I have my own frame," I said. "It is made of paper, ink, and signatures." Her gaze flicked toward the far wall again, where the glass met the doorframe. Maybe she liked to check her angles. Maybe she liked to see who might be listening. Maybe she was just human under the polish and needed something to look at that was not my face. "We are aligned," she said finally. "We are not," I said. "But alignment is not required for gravity to work." I left her there with the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a spoon clinking against ceramic. My hands were steady. My legs did not shake. The elevator doors closed on the image of her tapping her tablet with a fingernail that looked expensive. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop to a surprise. A forward from someone in finance who had known me since the days when we stapled our own expense reports. The subject line was a shrug. "Thought you should see." Inside was an agenda for a board prep call later in the week. It used phrases that sounded responsible. "Optimize senior cost centers before public event." "Tie efficiency metrics to leadership comp." "Review legal exposure." It might have been a grocery list if not for the numbers that followed each line. I saved it. I saved it again to a separate place. I sent a single sentence to my lawyer. "We are in business." He responded with a thumbs-up emoji and then a line that made me laugh. "Do not delete anything. Do not forward anything to anyone who does not have a reason to be trusted for the rest of your life." I promised him I would behave. I turned off the little preview box that showed new emails as they arrived. I do not like to watch a storm coming pixel by pixel. I prefer to hear the thunder once and then decide whether to run. By late afternoon, the building had settled into that slow rhythm that comes after the loud part of the day. The windows bruised to a blue that looked honest. I packed my bag, slid my laptop into its sleeve, and looked around at the space that had once felt like a second home. The whiteboard still had a faint outline of the dragon someone had drawn during our last ambitious migration. I left the trace there. The next person to wipe the board might smile. On my way out, I stopped by the security desk. The new guard looked relieved to see me upright. "Everything okay?" he asked, in the voice people use when they are not sure if they are allowed to ask. "The building is learning new tricks," I said. "We will all adjust." He nodded as if that were wisdom. Maybe it was. Maybe we are all just practicing the art of being new at something that used to be easy. The air outside smelled like rain that could not make up its mind. I walked toward the river again because that was where my head cleared. I watched a woman teach a child to ride a bike without training wheels. The child looked terrified and furious, and then, in a blink, both emotions fell away and there was only momentum. I found myself clapping, as did a stranger on a bench. The mother laughed and looked like she might cry. We were all part of a story that had nothing to do with Heliction and everything to do with balance. I went home before the sky changed its mind. My apartment was tidy in the way an apartment gets when you are too tired to be messy. I set my bag on the counter and opened the laptop again. The vault sat on the screen like a door that had waited a long time to be opened twice in one day. I went to the agreement. I read the sentence about termination without cause. I read the line about acceleration and superseding language. I read the effective dates and the signatures. I read everything until my eyes felt like they had been washed. Then I opened the folder called Gravel. I read the careful subject lines. I read the slide headers that tried to smile. I read one email that had been redacted in a clumsy way, with names blacked out but file names left intact. The file name included 3 letters that made my neck go cold. They were the initials of a board member who liked to talk at all hands about culture. At the very bottom of the folder was the message that made me sit back. The sender field showed only a dot. The body was one sentence. Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself. The date had been last week. The time had been almost midnight. I stared at the sentence until it blurred. I felt the same calm I had felt this morning when the badge turned red. A door had closed. Another door had quietly unlocked itself from the inside. I closed the folder and set the laptop aside. I cooked something simple because simple food reminds me that the body is not a courtroom. I ate at the counter and stood at the window while the city drifted toward evening. Every few minutes my phone buzzed with something from the building. I did not pick it up. Not tonight. Tonight was for a full breath before the next length of the pool. I washed the plate. I wiped the counter. I set the mug upside down on the rack and watched the water run off the rim. It was the company mug, white and plain. I opened a cupboard and reached past it for the one I liked, blue with white letters. When I left the office that day, someone had put it on top in the box. Someone who understood that small kindness is a form of rebellion. I set it on the shelf where I could see it in the morning. Before bed, I stood in the doorway to the little room I use as an office. The laptop sat on the desk like a closed eye. I could have opened it again and memorized every clause. I could have written timelines and named names and mapped motives. Instead, I turned off the light. My lawyer would do the math, I would do the sleeping. I slept like a person who has a plan, even if the plan is only this. Wake up. Tell the truth. Carry the paper that has your name on it. Carry the other paper that someone sent late at night because they could not make peace with what they had seen. Morning came with that thin gold line across the floorboards that always makes me feel like I have another chance. I brewed coffee in the blue mug and stood at the window for 3 sips. The river flashed. The city yawned. My phone vibrated on the counter with a call from my lawyer. I answered. "We meet at 10, he said. Bring the agreement. Bring the side letters. Bring the calm voice. They will try to make you hurry. You will not hurry." I smiled even though he could not see it. "I will not hurry," I said. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like rain again. The sky could not decide. That was fine. I had already decided. I walked toward the train with the kind of stride that tells a building you will be back, but on your terms. The day would bring a room and a box and a smile that pretended to be friendly. It would bring a signature I would not give and a wire they would not want to send. It would bring a sentence that looked harmless and was not. It would bring the first sound of the story beginning to tell itself. For now there was the platform, the rattle of the cars, the quiet in my chest that felt like a tide turning. I got on. I held the rail. I watched my reflection in the dark glass and saw a person who still loved to fix things. That will not change, I thought. Not the love, only the value I place on who deserves it. The train slid into the tunnel. The city disappeared for a moment. All I could see was my own face and the faint outline of the people beside me, a woman with a book, a kid with headphones, a man in a suit rehearsing a sentence under his breath, all of us traveling toward whatever waited with our names on it. I closed my eyes and pictured the red light on the server room door. It blinked once in my memory. I pictured it turning green. Then I let it go. There are doors you do not need to open anymore to know what is on the other side. There are rooms that have learned to keep you out. There are also rooms that are waiting, quiet and patient, for you to arrive with your paper and your voice and the knowledge that you have kept for years because you knew this day would come. The train rose back into light. I smiled to myself and stepped forward as the doors opened. The morning after my meeting with my lawyer felt sharper, as if the city had adjusted its edges overnight. I carried the contract in a slim folder, the way one might carry a map out of a labyrinth. Every step toward the office felt heavier, but also more certain. I was no longer just walking into Heliction. I was walking into a story I knew I would one day retell. When I arrived, the lobby had that false brightness it always had after a long night of cleaning and rearranging. The plants looked watered, the floor gleamed, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish. Everything said, "Nothing is wrong," but people's eyes told the truth. A receptionist glanced up and quickly looked down again. Junior engineer walked past me and pretended to scroll on his phone. It was the look of people who have heard whispers and are practicing silence. I took the elevator to my floor. My badge still worked there, but I had no illusions it would last. I sat at my desk and powered up my laptop. Emails rushed in. Some were ordinary, bug reports, vendor queries, automated alerts. Others were darker. Invitations to meetings I had never been asked to attend before, now marked as knowledge transfer. Notices that system ownership had been reassigned. At 9 sharp, my team gathered in the small conference room. It had always been our refuge, with its faded map of New York on the wall and the coffee machine that groaned like an old friend. I watched them file in, carrying laptops and nervous energy. I remembered when these same faces used to beam with the kind of pride that comes from building things nobody else had built. Now they carried the weight of being unwanted. I did not take the head of the table. I never liked that chair. I sat at the side where I could see everyone at once. You've seen the changes, I began. You've seen the memos, the dashboards, the cues rerouted to someone else's inbox. You know what this is? No one spoke. One of them tapped his pencil against his notebook, a soft, nervous rhythm. I picked up a marker and drew a rectangle on the board. Inside it, I wrote PAYMENTS. Then 3 more rectangles, auth, reconcile, CERTS, the basics, our bones. This is still ours, I said. For as long as we are here, we will keep the lights on. We will make sure when things break at midnight, there's a path for whoever has to fix it. But we will also keep copies. Every ticket, every reroute, every moment our work is renamed as someone else's efficiency. There was a silence, then a few soft laughs. The kind of laugh people use when they want to say thank you but are afraid it might sound like despair. We are engineers, I reminded them. We finish what we start. We leave maps for those who come after us, even if they are the ones holding knives. The youngest engineer, a woman barely 2 years into her career, looked up. And what about you, Cameron? The question hovered. Everyone was waiting for me to say something easy, something soothing. Something is coming for me, I said simply. You know it. I know it, I will handle it. Your job is to keep the lights on. If the runbooks fail, you call me. Even if I am not here, I will answer. Relief flickered across their faces, even if they did not believe me entirely. Belief was a luxury. Routine was survival. I gave them tasks that sounded ordinary: document the handshake between systems, list certificate expirations, export reconciliations. Ordinary is a kind of shield. It tells fear to wait at the door. When they left, I lingered. I erased the rectangles on the board, leaving only faint smudges. The dragon doodle from a past crisis was still visible, ghostly on the corner. I smiled. Dragons never really leave. I wandered to the kitchen for coffee. The smell of burnt beans and lemon cleaner met me. A few people loitered, speaking in low voices. Sienna appeared, tablet pressed to her chest like it was armor. You are quite a presence, she said cheerfully. Exactly the kind of voice that represents the past. The future needs something lighter. I stirred my coffee slowly. Respect would have been letting me into the server room I built, I said. Her smile flickered, then returned. Respect looks like transition. We will treat your exit with dignity. Exit. She said it as if it were already written. Maybe it was. I did not reply. I took my cup and walked out, leaving her with the hum of the fridge. Back at my desk, an email from finance blinked onto my screen. It was forwarded by an old ally. Subject line, thought you should see. It was an agenda for a board meeting later in the week. The first line made my jaw tight. Target reductions in senior cost centers on track. I saved it twice, then again to an external drive. I sent one message to my lawyer, we are in business. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and then a sentence, do not delete anything. Do not forward to anyone you wouldn't trust for life. I promised him silently. Then I turned off my email previews. I did not want to see the storm pixel by pixel. I wanted to hear the thunder all at once. By late afternoon, the office dimmed. The fluorescent hum softened, the glass turned blue. I packed my laptop and looked around the room. My team's chairs stood empty, but their notebooks were filled with plans. The whiteboard had smudges like ghosts. The building felt like it was holding its breath. On my way out, I stopped by security. The guard looked up, his young face lined with concern. Everything okay, MS Cross? The building is learning tricks, I said. We will adjust. He nodded as if I had given him wisdom. Maybe I had. Outside, the sky was undecided. The air smelled like rain but stayed dry. I walked toward the river, letting the city's noise wash through me. On a pedestrian bridge, I watched a child wobble on a new bicycle until fear gave way to balance. People clapped. Strangers cheered. I clapped too. That small triumph reminded me, balance is everything. I went home before the rain arrived. My apartment was neat in the way loneliness makes it. I poured myself tea and opened my laptop one last time. The vault stared back at me. I opened the contract again, reading clause 27B until it burned itself into memory. In the event of involuntary termination without cause after 15 years, all unvested equity shall accelerate. I whispered the words aloud like a prayer. Not anger, not fear, just recognition. The folder called Gravel still waited, heavy with secrets. I opened it and read the midnight message again. Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself. The words settled over me like a shadow. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow, I knew the story would begin to tell itself. I woke early the next day, earlier than usual, not because of alarm or habit, but because my mind had already started without me. The city was still half asleep when I dressed. The folder with my contract sat on the table where I had left it, waiting like a companion that knew the route better than I did. By the time I reached the office, the morning rush had thickened. People poured through the lobby doors with the quiet obedience of commuters, each one carrying their private story. Mine was heavier, but I carried it the same way, calm face, steady pace, as if the air itself might ask questions if I hurried. The elevator rose. I watched my reflection in the metal doors. A woman who had been here nearly 2 decades stared back at me, a woman who was supposed to be invisible now. When I stepped out, my desk had been moved. Not far, just across the row, but it was enough to say something. Someone else sat where I had sat for years. My chair had been replaced with a cheaper one, the kind that squeaked when you shifted. On the desk itself, my files were stacked too neatly, as if arranged by someone who wanted to erase me politely. A sticky note rested on top of the stack. It read, Conference Room B, 10 a.m. no name, no signature. Just the words like a summons. I sat anyway, opened my laptop and logged in. Access still worked, though slower, like a door creaking before it locked. Emails poured in. More knowledge transfer invitations. More rerouted tickets. More gentle nudges that said, you are fading. At 9:30, I gathered my team again. Their eyes followed me the way travelers watch a guide who knows the road better than anyone else. We filled the small conference room. The map of New York on the wall looked older now, its colors faded but still true. I drew another diagram. Not rectangles this time, but circles connected with arrows. At the center, I wrote truth. Around it, logs, contracts, emails, witnesses. This, I said, is what matters now. They can change titles. They can reroute tickets, but they cannot erase the truth. We will keep it, quietly, carefully. When the time comes, it will speak. They looked at me as if I had already won something. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. This is survival, not victory. Victory is later. At 10 minutes before 10, I dismissed them. Their notebooks were heavier than their laptops. They left with quiet determination. I stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the board. The word truth glowed in dry erase ink under the fluorescent lights. I wiped it away before leaving. Sometimes erasing a word is the safest way to keep it. Conference Room B was waiting. Inside, 2 people from HR sat stiffly, folders in front of them like shields. Sienna entered last, carrying her tablet, smiling as though the room was a stage. Cameron, thank you for joining, she said. We wanted to talk about transition. Her tone was sweet but sharp. She began listing tasks, documenting every critical process, preparing guides for new talent, handing off system knowledge. She spoke as if the work was already no longer mine, as if I was only a scribe of my own disappearance. I let her speak. I nodded at the right times. Then I asked one question. What happens when the cluster fails at 3 in the morning? She hesitated. Her assistant shifted uncomfortably. Automation will handle it, she said finally. And when automation breaks, silence stretched for 3 beats. Finally, she said, the council will adapt. I leaned back in my chair. Her assistant would not meet my eyes. I saw the flicker of something there, doubt, maybe guilt. A brief signal, quickly buried. When the meeting ended, they gave me another list of assignments. I took it without a word. Outside, I folded the paper and slid it into my folder with the contract. Evidence grows in small ways. That evening, I walked home slowly, letting the city lights blur. On a corner near the river, I bought a sandwich from a vendor who had been there for years. He smiled at me the same way he always did, no agenda, no whisper of dismissal. It felt like oxygen. At home, I sat by the window with my laptop. I opened the vault again, rereading Clause 27B until I knew it by heart. Then I opened Gravel. The anonymous message still sat there. Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself. I whispered it aloud. The words felt heavier now, as if they belonged not just to me but to the building itself, to every person who had ever been erased. I poured myself a drink and raised the glass to the night. The reflection in the window was steady. My voice was steady too. I am not leaving quietly, I told the glass. The next morning would bring the box, the separation papers, the smile that tried too hard. I was ready. The night after the council meeting, I stayed in the apartment longer than usual. The city had gone quiet, but my mind refused to follow. I poured a small cup of tea, black, no sugar, and placed it beside my laptop. The vault waited. Gravel waited. They had been waiting for me for years. I opened the vault first. Years of work, contracts, and notes, all stored with the meticulousness of someone who knew they might be forgotten. I scrolled past system diagrams I had drafted when I was 25, when the servers were small enough to move by hand. I paused at a file from 2006. The contract was thin, unassuming, almost polite. Its words, however, carried a weight that only someone who had lived 17 years in this building could feel. Clause 27B. I read it slowly, aloud to myself. In the event of involuntary termination without cause after 15 years of continuous service, all unvested equity will accelerate at current fair market value. I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Not triumphantly. Calmly. This was not a victory. This was a promise kept across time. I leaned back and opened Gravel. The folder was heavier than its contents suggested. Each file felt like a paperweight on the chest, a reminder that small things often hide the biggest truths. Emails, screenshots, memos, all carefully extracted, some with names redacted, some blurred. A pattern was forming. Someone inside the building had noticed what I knew, what everyone else had ignored. I found one email with a sender field that was simply a dot. The subject line was innocuous, board prep notes. The content, however, was not. A single sentence blinked on the screen. Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself. I stared at it. I did not know who sent it. I did not know why, but it felt like a key turned in a lock I had not realized existed. My heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from recognition. I was not alone in this. Someone had left a breadcrumb for me. I cross-referenced the timestamp. Midnight last week. Someone had stayed awake, watched, and decided to act discreetly. The coffee had cooled. I sipped it slowly. The warmth spread, grounding me. Decisions were forming, but they had to be precise. I was not rushing. I had learned patience in this building. Every failed rollout, every system crash, every night spent debugging alone, they had taught me timing. And now, timing would be everything. I thought about Sienna and the Innovation Council. They believed they had outmaneuvered me. They had created obstacles, rerouted responsibilities, and rewritten narratives. They did not know I had kept every receipt, every note, every email. The proof was here. Every bit of it cataloged in the vault and in Gravel. I opened the oldest side letter in the vault, one from the original CFO. His words were careful, almost hesitant. We cannot scale without her. Ensure she understands this will be respected. The paper faded slightly on the screen, but the meaning did not. They had once acknowledged my power, my necessity. That recognition had been buried by ambition and convenience. It was time to unearth it. A message pinged on my phone, a team member checking in quietly. Are you okay? Do you want help with the documentation tonight? I typed back a simple message. I am fine. Follow the plan. Keep everything detailed. The night deepened. Streetlights flickered outside, and somewhere a train rumbled past. I felt a strange sense of calm, as though the city itself was giving me room to think, to plan, to wait. I reopened Gravel. I scanned every file. There were inconsistencies, gaps, little mistakes that pointed to deliberate carelessness, someone inside trying to preserve evidence without drawing attention. Whoever had sent that midnight message was calculating risk and trust simultaneously. They knew that if I moved too quickly, the trail would vanish. If I moved too slowly, the opportunity would pass. I copied the files to a secure drive. Encryption, redundancy, multiple locations. The kind of care one takes with treasure maps and legal contracts. One misstep and it all could disappear. Finally, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the tension drain. My mind was racing, but it had direction now. The next steps would require composure, precision, and patience. The first move had been given to me. The rest would follow. Outside, the city slept unaware. I sipped my tea again. Clause 27B. Gravel, the message from the anonymous insider. Everything aligned like constellations that only someone patient enough could see, and I was patient. I would wait for the right moment. I would prepare every detail, and when the time came, the story would indeed tell itself. The hours passed slowly, but the night seemed to bend time around me. I moved through the apartment methodically, checking every file, every note, every backup. Gravel had become a kind of compass. Each message, each screenshot, each redacted email pointed toward a single truth. I was not alone, and the system that had tried to erase me was more vulnerable than they imagined. I traced connections between the files. Patterns emerged. Every misrouted ticket, every reassignment, every missing approval, each was a breadcrumb leading to a bigger picture. Someone inside had seen the cracks and left clues, subtle but undeniable. I pulled up the message from the anonymous insider again. Its brevity belied its importance. Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself. I pondered the words. Not clean. That could mean greed, corruption, or fear. Whoever had written it had knowledge, access, and courage. They had chosen to trust me with it. That alone was remarkable. I looked back at the contract. Clause 27b, it sat there, quietly authoritative. The words promised leverage, power, and inevitability. But alone, they were inert. With the hidden ally, the momentum began to gather. The pieces could fall into place. I opened my notes from previous years, everything meticulously recorded. Incidents, failures, successes, meetings that had not been documented officially but existed in memory and private logs. This was my armor, my ammunition. I labeled the files carefully, structured them, and placed markers in the folders. Each one was a reminder: prepare, wait, observe, act. Outside, the city shifted. Early signs of dawn brushed the windows. The lights reflected off the river, a silver streak that seemed to pulse with possibility. I sipped coffee again and let the warmth settle me. Patience. Timing, precision. I thought about Sienna. Her smile, her posture, her confidence. She believed the council, and their changes had put me out of the game. She did not realize that for every step they had taken forward, I had anticipated, recorded, and cataloged it. They had underestimated both the experience and the network I had cultivated quietly over the years. I called my lawyer. We spoke briefly, just enough to confirm he understood the documents, the clause, and the files. Everything else, he said, would unfold tomorrow. Then I returned to gravel. Another file caught my attention, a partial log from an internal audit. The system had flagged it incorrectly, leaving the trail incomplete for anyone else. For me, it was complete enough to understand intent, enough to connect dots that Sienna and her allies assumed were invisible. The room grew warmer. The night deepened. My focus sharpened. I began mapping the scenario in my mind, steps they would take, emails they would send, reactions they would have. The insider's message was a variable I could not control, but I could predict how it would interact with the contracts and the evidence. I paused. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I closed my eyes for a moment and visualized the sequence of events. The council meeting where they would attempt to finalize my removal. The email trails that would backfire. The activation of Clause 27 be the slow unraveling of the system that had thought itself infallible. I opened my eyes. Dawn was brushing the skyline with faint gold. The city was waking. I was ready. I packed my laptop, ensuring the external drives were secured, each file duplicated and encrypted, every backup discreetly hidden. The preparation felt ritualistic, each action deliberate, each moment of waiting purposeful. By mid-morning, I was ready to step into the day. The building, oblivious to the plans coalescing within it, seemed normal, routine, mundane. The people moving through the corridors carried on as though nothing had changed. But I knew the truth. Change was imminent. I checked the email one last time. Nothing new, no alerts, no surprises. The only message that mattered had already been delivered silently at midnight. Some of them are not clean. I had received it. I had cataloged it. I had internalized it. And now the stage was set. Clause 27b, gravel. The unseen ally. Everything aligned, poised to unfold. The city outside was unaware, the building unaware, and Sienna unaware. But I was aware. And awareness is the first step toward action. I stood by the window, watching the river. Light danced on its surface. It was a simple truth: flow cannot be stopped. Neither could I. The story, as the anonymous message had promised, would indeed tell itself, and I would ensure that every word, every action, and every revelation hit exactly as intended. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. The day awaited. The game was beginning. I arrived at the office early, before the floors filled with people pretending everything was normal. The lobby was bright, polished, artificially cheerful. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, but I smelled the tension anyway. People's eyes flicked toward me and quickly away. They were rehearsing silence, practicing obedience. I was both familiar and foreign to them now. The elevator ride to my floor was quiet. I watched my reflection in the metal doors. I was calm. Every line in my face, every movement spoke of preparation. I was ready. At my desk, my laptop sat waiting, my folder of contracts beside it. I opened Gravel again. I ran my eyes over the files, the emails, the screenshots. Every thread, every log, every carefully hidden piece of evidence had been cataloged, duplicated, encrypted. I knew exactly what I had. I did not need to panic. There was no room for panic in what I was about to do. Precision was all that mattered. At 9:30, I was summoned to a conference room. The door was glass, transparent, exposing every line, every glance. Inside, 2 HR representatives sat stiffly at the table, their folders aligned neatly in front of them like shields. Sienna entered last, smiling, carrying her tablet like armor. Her eyes were sharp, her posture perfect. "Cameron," she said, voice bright and rehearsed. "Thank you for coming. We wanted to talk about transition." Transition. The word sounded polite, but I knew better. This was about removing me, about rewriting the narrative. I took a seat across from her, relaxed but alert, letting her speak first. She outlined tasks, documenting every critical process, creating guides for the new talent, handing off system knowledge. Her words flowed like water, intended to reassure. Every sentence implied my work was no longer mine. Every word was designed to diminish my presence. I let her speak, nodding politely. Then I asked, "What happens when the cluster fails at 3 in the morning?" Sienna blinked. Her assistant shifted nervously. "Automation will handle it," she said finally. And when automation fails, her smile tightened. The assistant avoided my gaze. That flicker was enough. Someone here knew the truth. Someone had seen. The meeting ended. They handed me a document listing assignments, meant to feel routine, meant to assert control. I took it calmly. Every line, every item, I cataloged silently. Every request was noted and duplicated. Outside the conference room, I paused. The hallway smelled like polished tile and faint coffee. I walked to my team's area. Desks were moved again, chairs replaced. A junior engineer occupied the seat I had held for nearly 2 decades. I did not react. I only observed. Every subtle shift, every reassignment, every reassigned responsibility was now data. I took a mental note. By late morning, I gathered the essential items, the folder with contracts, side letters, and gravel. Everything was secured, duplicated, encrypted. I had learned that preparation is as much about redundancy as it is about calm. I moved to the small conference room that had always been a safe space. Here, the team would receive instructions. I did not need to motivate them with speeches. They understood the stakes. They knew the rules, the risks, and the importance of every record we kept. We sat around the table. I handed each a printed copy of critical logs and step-by-step notes for each service. Their eyes widened slightly at the thoroughness, but they trusted me. "We will follow the plan," I said. "Every action documented, every discrepancy recorded. We will operate as if nothing is wrong, but in reality, we are setting the pieces in place. Every report, every ticket, every email saved. Nothing can be erased if we move correctly." One of them, the youngest, asked quietly, "And what about you?" I met her gaze. "I will act at the right time," I said. "Do your work as if the company will never know the difference, but keep records as if it might." The weight in the room was palpable, but calm. They left with their instructions, understanding the importance without being told the full story. Alone, I opened the laptop again. Clause 27B sat on the screen like a promise. Gravel folder open beside it. The anonymous message still echoed. "Some of them are not clean. When the time is right, the story will tell itself." I reread it. Patience, timing, precision, all aligned now. The next step was imminent. Outside the window, the city moved unaware. Inside, I was ready. The stage was set, the players in position. I checked my watch. Soon, very soon, the door would open and the building itself would begin to show the cracks I had cataloged, layer by layer. I closed the laptop briefly, letting my hands rest. I visualized the sequence: the HR announcements, the assignments, the reassignments, the attempted erasure of my presence. And then the reaction. The contracts would activate, the evidence would surface, the insider's message would clarify itself. Timing, patience, precision. I sipped coffee, letting the warmth ground me. The world outside was oblivious. The people inside the building were rehearsing their roles. I was observing, calculating, waiting for the moment when the first move would trigger a chain reaction. And I knew it would. By mid-afternoon, the office hummed with routine as if nothing had shifted. People moved through corridors, tapping keyboards, answering phones, sending emails. Each step was unaware of the game unfolding quietly around them. I returned to my desk and opened the folder again. Gravel lay beside the contract, a silent witness to what was about to occur. I reviewed every document meticulously. Every screenshot, every email, every memo. I traced connections, confirmed timestamps, checked for gaps, and ensured redundancy. Nothing could be questioned or lost. The minor inconsistencies I had noted before now felt intentional. Someone had made sure I could find the truth if I paid attention. The redacted names, the blurred sender fields, the partial logs, they were breadcrumbs, subtle and precise. Whoever had sent the midnight message had calculated risk and trust with exceptional care. I thought about Sienna Vale. Her confidence, her rehearsed smile, the belief that she controlled the narrative. She did not realize that her actions had been cataloged, tracked, and prepared for. Each email she sent, each reassignment she enacted, only built the foundation for the inevitable reversal. The assistant had been careful, too careful. Their brief flicker of doubt during the meeting had not escaped me. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it confirmed the presence of an ally within the ranks. Someone with eyes on the truth and the courage to let it surface when the time was right. I left my desk and moved toward the team area. Desks were still shifted, chairs replaced. Junior engineers glanced at me, curiosity masked by compliance. I acknowledged them with a nod and returned to the conference room. I began to prepare instructions for the evening's work. Not long, precise, and clear. Documentation had to be perfect. Logs exported, tickets saved, every step of every critical process verified and duplicated. I reminded them that routine is the most potent shield. Acting like nothing is wrong while recording everything ensures that when the moment comes, we will all be ready. A member of the team hesitated. "What about you, Cameron?" I met her eyes, calm and steady. "The clause exists. The evidence exists. The time will come. Do your work, stay precise, keep records, and trust that the preparation will be sufficient." They left, carrying documents, logs, and the weight of knowing only a part of the story. I remained behind, alone with the vault and gravel. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I reviewed the files again. I checked every entry, every timestamp, every note, making sure that when the chain reaction started, there would be no gaps. The city outside was unaware. Inside, I was ready. The buildings, the corridors, the people, all unaware of the precision unfolding. The game had been set, each piece in position, every move accounted for. I opened the contract once more. Clause 27B, clean, authoritative. The words were simple yet devastating. Involuntary termination after 15 years triggers immediate acceleration of unvested equity. The legal power sat in my hands. Alone, it was effective. Combined with the insider's message and the meticulous evidence, it became unstoppable. I closed my eyes briefly. Patience, timing, precision. These were the keys to what was coming. I envisioned Sienna receiving the notice, HR realizing the implications, and the council blindsided by the activation of the clause they believed would never be used. Even as I planned, I maintained the outward calm. Outwardly, I was still a participant in the routine, checking emails, responding to innocuous messages, nodding politely when approached. Every action was deliberate, every inaction equally so. By late afternoon, I had reviewed everything for the last time. The files, the contracts, the logs, the gravel messages, everything was in place. The next day would be decisive. The first move had been anticipated. The chain reaction prepared. All that remained was execution. I stood and stretched. The city outside was golden now, the river reflecting light in glimmering silver. I walked to the window and watched the pedestrians below. They moved unaware, each of them part of a machine that did not yet know its vulnerabilities. I brewed a cup of tea, sitting quietly with the warmth against my hands. I sipped slowly, tasting the calm before the storm. Every detail had been accounted for. The evidence was irrefutable. The clause was enforceable. The insider's foresight had provided the final nudge. Everything was ready. I looked at my reflection in the window, the same woman who had been ignored, bypassed, and quietly erased for years. The same woman who now carried the tools, the timing, and the knowledge to rewrite the narrative. I took a deep breath, letting the river of thought settle. Tomorrow, the office would awaken to a day they could not anticipate. The story, as the anonymous insider had said, would indeed tell itself. I finished my tea, closed the laptop, and organized my desk. Every item in place, everything ready for the morning. I walked to the door, shoulders straight, eyes forward. The moment of execution was approaching, and I was ready to meet it. The morning was crisp when I arrived at Heliction. The street smelled faintly of wet asphalt and roasted coffee. My steps were measured, steady. Inside, the lobby gleamed, polished, and cheerful. People passed by without noticing me, though a few glanced quickly before looking away. I did not mind. I had work to do. My folder was at my side, heavy with contracts, side letters, and gravel. Everything duplicated, encrypted, secured. I carried it like armor and ammunition at the same time. Today, it would all matter. At 9:30, I was summoned to the HR office. The door was glass, and I could see Sienna Vale waiting inside, tablet pressed to her chest. Her assistant hovered nearby, posture tight. They believed the meeting would proceed according to their script. They were wrong. "Cameron," she said brightly, "thank you for coming. We wanted to discuss your transition and next steps." Transition. They had used that word repeatedly, but I did not flinch. I sat calmly, letting her outline the tasks, documenting critical processes, preparing guides for new hires, handing off responsibilities. She spoke with the practiced ease of someone delivering a speech she had rehearsed dozens of times. I let her finish. Then I spoke. "What happens when the cluster fails at 3 in the morning?" Her eyes flickered. The assistant shifted nervously. "Automation will handle it," she replied finally. "And when automation fails," silence stretched. The kind of silence that tilts the room, makes walls lean. I saw the assistant glance toward Sienna, the smallest flicker of doubt betraying the careful composure they had rehearsed. I opened my folder and laid it on the table. I did not touch the contract, did not open the gravel folder yet. I simply let it rest there, a silent statement. Sienna leaned forward slightly. "That is unnecessary," she said, voice tight. "The transition will be smooth. The plan is clear." I smiled faintly. Perhaps for the first time, her smile faltered. I slid the contract forward, letting the edge touch her tablet. Clause 27B was visible. Sienna's eyes widened subtly. The HR representative stiffened. They had believed the clause would never see the light of day. They had underestimated patience, timing, and preparation. The contract sat on the table like a fuse waiting for fire. I did not rush. I did not threat. I only observed. Their reactions were enough. The first tremors of imbalance were visible in posture, in hesitation, in the quiet exchange of glances. "You know what this is," I said softly. "You know exactly what Clause 27B means." Sienna blinked. "I can assure you, it is only procedural," she replied, trying to maintain control. I shook my head. Procedural does not apply to actions taken in the dark. It does not apply when someone tries to erase 17 years of work and knowledge. This clause, this contract, this evidence, they are not procedural, they are absolute. The assistant's hand trembled slightly over a tablet. I noted it. Evidence. Timing. Alignment. I opened Gravel and displayed a series of emails, screenshots, and logs. The room was quiet. Every file a silent indictment, every timestamp a mirror. "We are not here to debate competence or intent," I said. "We are here to acknowledge reality. Every action you have taken, every attempt to rewrite history, every rerouted ticket, every reassignment has been recorded, duplicated, and preserved." Sienna swallowed. The words landed like stones, and she knew it. I let a moment pass. The kind of moment that stretches long enough for someone to recognize inevitability. Then I spoke. "Effective immediately, I am invoking Clause 27B. All unvested equity shall accelerate at current fair market value. The contract is binding. There is no discussion. There is no delay." The silence deepened. HR representatives looked at each other, their training and rehearsed confidence unraveling in small, precise increments. Sienna's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her tablet. She had believed she controlled the narrative, but now the narrative had flipped. I closed the folder and stood. The weight of preparation, patience, and timing had reached its peak. I was calm. I had planned every detail. Every file, every contract, every email, every breadcrumb left by the insider, all had led to this moment. The room was no longer hers. The room was ours. The evidence was undeniable. The clause was enforceable. And the story was beginning to tell itself. I walked toward the door. My team had been instructed to document, observe, and stay ready. The next moves would unfold according to plan. I did not look back. I did not need to. The tremor I had started would grow without my interference. Outside the glass walls, the office continued as if nothing had changed. The city beyond was unaware. But inside, a quiet reckoning had begun. I stepped into the hallway, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Clause 27B had been activated. Gravel had been revealed. And the chain of inevitability had begun to move. The moment I stepped out of the HR office, the air in the hallway felt different. Quiet murmurs rippled through the staff who had caught glimpses of what was happening behind the glass. Nothing overt, nothing loud, just subtle shifts in posture, quick glances, half-formed questions left unspoken. The building sensed the change, and so did I. I returned to my desk briefly to check the feeds, the logs, the emails. Everything had been documented, every trace of intent preserved. Every attempt to erase me had become evidence against the manipulators themselves. Clause 27B was not just words on paper, it was a signal, a spark. Minutes later, finance began confirming the calculations automatically. Notifications buzzed softly on my phone. All unvested equity had been accelerated as the clause demanded. The numbers were staggering, millions flowing where the law had decreed. The room that had tried to contain me could no longer deny the shift. I watched as Sienna's assistant, previously composed, fidgeted with the tablet. Their earlier hesitation had grown into something tangible, fear, perhaps, or the realization that the script they thought they were following had been rewritten. The flicker of doubt I had noticed in prior meetings now crystallized into certainty. Someone in this office had chosen truth over obedience. HR began scrambling. Emails were drafted, rescinded, revised. Calls were made to legal, but nothing could undo the activation of the clause. Each movement they made only highlighted the inevitability of what I had set into motion. I took a moment to breathe, to let the calm wash over me. Preparation, patience, precision, these were the pillars that had brought me here. Every file in gravel, every careful note, every duplicated email, it all coalesced at this point. I had not rushed. I had observed, waited, and timed every action. Outside my office window, the river reflected light in silver ribbons. The city moved, oblivious to the quiet upheaval within the building. I leaned against the glass, considering the irony. The architects of the council had tried to orchestrate control, and yet control had shifted entirely. Across the floor, whispers grew louder. HR employees exchanged hurried glances. They had counted on compliance, but compliance could not reconcile with documented evidence. They were forced to acknowledge reality. Sienna, who had once moved with absolute confidence, now appeared small in the conference room. Her tablet was still pressed to her chest, but her hands trembled slightly. The illusion of command had fractured, and she could do nothing to stop the unfolding chain of events. I picked up my phone and texted my lawyer a simple message: clause activated, evidence verified, proceeding as planned. Within minutes, confirmations began arriving. Legal verified compliance, finance acknowledged the accelerated equity. The cascade had begun. I felt no triumph, only clarity. The next steps were procedural. Notifications would reach the board. Reports would be circulated. Everyone who had attempted to rewrite history would be forced to confront the truth. I walked toward the window again, looking down at the river. The currents moved, unbothered by the chaos above. Flow continued regardless of interference. So too would the truth continue, guided by evidence, contracts, and patience. A soft knock at my door drew my attention. One of my team had arrived, eyes wide but resolute. "Everything is in place," they said quietly. "Logs, documentation, communications, everything aligned." "Good," I said. "Stay calm, observe, document. The rest will follow naturally." I returned to the conference room briefly. Sienna had stepped away to take a call, the assistant scrambling in her absence. I let them see the evidence, the contracts, the emails, the files I had displayed earlier. Every glance they gave, every whisper they shared, was a reminder of the inevitability of preparation. The building no longer felt hostile. It felt like a stage, each actor playing their part, unaware that the script had been rewritten without their knowledge. I stepped back to my desk, closed gravel, and leaned back in my chair. Clause 27B had done its work. The evidence was undeniable. The insider's foresight had ensured clarity. Every attempt at manipulation had been neutralized by careful documentation and timing. Outside, the city moved forward unaware. Inside, a subtle revolution had occurred. The first ripple in a chain that would change everything had begun. I sipped my coffee, finally letting a smile pass briefly across my face. Not a smile of triumph, not yet, but a smile of calm anticipation. The dominoes had been set. The world within these walls would now act according to the truth I had preserved, guided by contracts, evidence, and meticulous preparation. Tomorrow, the consequences would unfold. But tonight, I allowed myself to rest, knowing that every move had been accounted for, every piece in place, every ripple directed toward the inevitable conclusion. The morning light felt unusually crisp as I arrived at Heliction. The lobby buzzed with the typical start-of-day energy, but it carried a new tension. Staff whispered in corners, exchanged furtive glances, and paused longer at screens than necessary. Something had shifted overnight. I walked to my desk with the contract and gravel folder secured in my bag. Clause 27B had activated. The ripple had already begun. Notifications from finance and legal confirmed everything: accelerated equity, verified documents, irrevocable enforcement. The first tremors of change were spreading, subtle but unmistakable. At my desk, I opened emails from board members. Their subject lines were polite, neutral, but the content betrayed unease. Queries, requests for clarification, requests for verification. The activation of the clause had caught them off guard. The council had underestimated the power of preparation and evidence. HR was already in motion. Emails were drafted, rescinded, edited. Sienna was attempting to regain control, her movements precise but desperate. Each step she took highlighted her lack of authority. Each email she sent further exposed the inevitability of the situation. I watched from my office as a small group of administrators gathered in a side room. Their posture, the way they shuffled papers and glanced at each other, spoke volumes. They knew something significant had occurred. The documents in gravel were now circulating silently among those who needed to see them. Then I noticed him. Sienna's assistant. He had been careful, meticulous, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had been absent before. A hesitation. A small flicker of acknowledgement when he glanced at the boardroom where Sienna and HR were in crisis. He had been the one, the insider who had sent the midnight message, who had ensured I had access to the breadcrumbs I needed. Quiet, unseen, positioned perfectly to act without suspicion. I smiled faintly. Timing, patience, precision. The insider had created the final nudge, and I had aligned everything else around it. Every file, every contract, every piece of evidence had now been illuminated by their intervention. From my desk, I observed as board members called in. Legal teams verified the activation of Clause 27B. Finance confirmed the equity transfer. HR staff attempted to maintain order, but faltered as they realized the clause could not be reversed. The room that had been under Sienna's control just yesterday was unraveling before her eyes. I opened Gravel again, reviewing the carefully documented emails, screenshots, and logs. Each file confirmed what I already knew: everything was aligned. Every attempt to erase me had only strengthened my position. The assistant moved quickly, passing along critical evidence to the board and legal. His hands were steady, his face composed. He had understood the importance of the timing, the subtlety of the intervention. Without his action, the chain reaction might have been delayed, giving Sienna a chance to negotiate, to manipulate, to obscure. Now it was unstoppable. Sienna looked around, realizing the extent of her loss. Her smile faltered, replaced by a tension that made her seem smaller, less confident. For years, she had believed the council and her strategies gave her control. Now every email, every document, every action I had preserved was evidence against her narrative. I allowed myself a slow breath. No triumph yet, just observation. Control remained with me, guided by preparation and the unexpected but welcomed intervention of the insider. Outside my office window, the city moved on, oblivious. Inside, walls shifted. Positions changed. Influence realigned. The first real acknowledgement of power began to ripple through the organization. The insider had done their part. I had done mine. Now the structure was responding naturally to truth and legality. I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee, every detail accounted for, every piece of evidence in place. Every observer, every participant, now acting according to forces they could not yet fully see. The story was unfolding. The insider's foresight had ensured clarity. The activation of Clause 27B was just the beginning. Sienna's control was waning, HR's authority was faltering, and the board was being forced to confront undeniable reality. Patience, timing, precision. I smiled faintly to myself. The chain reaction had begun, and nothing in the building could stop it. The boardroom was tense. Phones buzzed, notifications pinged, and the digital clock on the wall ticked each second with relentless inevitability. Clause 27B had been activated, and every ledger, every file, every system log confirmed it. The acceleration of my unvested equity was not a question, it was reality. Sienna Vale's face had drained of color. The smile she had rehearsed for years no longer reached her eyes. She tried to assert control, flipping through her tablet as if commands could rewrite the law and contracts simultaneously. Each swipe, each scroll, only highlighted her diminishing authority. The assistant, quiet, composed, almost invisible until now, stood at the edge of the room. His hands were steady as he passed along critical files to the board and legal. Evidence that had been carefully documented, cross-referenced, and preserved now circulated in a controlled, deliberate cascade. He was the unseen hand, the insider who had ensured that Clause 27B could not be ignored, reversed, or manipulated. I watched him, acknowledging silently. Patience, timing, precision. He had understood the weight of each file, the importance of every timestamp, the necessity of subtlety. Without his foresight, Sienna and the council might have had a window to negotiate, to obscure, to stall. Now they had none. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Board members exchanged glances, each realization layering atop the last. Finance confirmed transfers automatically, each notification a soft chime of inevitability. Legal verified compliance, every clause binding and enforceable. Sienna attempted to speak. Words faltered. Her usual cadence, precise and confident, was replaced by a tremor. She tried again. It was procedural, she said. The clause is technical, she added. I shook my head, calm and measured. Technical or not, she realized, it was now unstoppable. Her attempts at manipulation had been neutralized by preparation, foresight, and the intervention of someone who had chosen integrity over compliance. The assistant handed a copy of the gravel folder to a board member. Screenshots, logs, emails, everything documented, everything corroborated. He had moved with precision, like someone who had rehearsed this for weeks without making a sound. The revelation hit the board members simultaneously. Not only had they underestimated me, but someone on the inside had ensured the truth could not be suppressed. A ripple of tension spread through HR. Administrators who had once believed in Sienna's command now questioned every decision. Their training, their confidence, even their loyalty trembled in the presence of evidence they could not deny. Sienna glanced at her assistant. His eyes, steady and calm, met hers for a brief moment. Recognition passed between them. He had acted, and she had been blind to it. The person she had underestimated was the quietest in the room. The one she had assumed would follow instructions without question had become the pivot on which the entire scenario turned. I observed without moving, letting the dominoes fall naturally. Clause 27B had done its work. The board, HR, finance, they were now bound by documented reality. Decisions, transfers, assignments, all aligned with the law, the contracts, and evidence preserved over time. Whispers grew into urgent discussions. Phones rang off the hook. Emails were sent, rescinded, corrected, and resent. Every attempt to stabilize the situation only emphasized the inevitability. The structure Sienna had relied upon to maintain control was dissolving before her eyes. The insider remained calm, watching, facilitating only when necessary. His timing had been impeccable. Every file delivered at the exact moment to maximize impact, every piece of evidence shared without overstepping, without revealing more than needed. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. The moment I had anticipated for years was unfolding exactly as planned. The chain reaction was unstoppable, and every element had been accounted for. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the organization was in a quiet state of upheaval. Decisions had to be made, acknowledgments given, corrections implemented. The first tremors of accountability had begun, and Sienna's control had vanished like mist under morning light. I felt no gloating, only clarity. The preparation, patience, and timing had been flawless. The insider's courage had ensured that the final element, truth revealed, was in place. The room had shifted. HR, the board, and the executives were now acting according to evidence, not perception. And I, having preserved every record, every contract, every note, stood ready to guide the outcome. Patience, timing, precision. The insider had acted, the clause had activated, and the cascade had begun. The story, as promised in the midnight message, was now telling itself. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The morning was unusually bright, the sunlight spilling across the polished floors of Heliction, but no brightness could hide the tension. Staff moved with hushed energy, whispers exchanged like currency. Everyone knew something had shifted overnight, even if they could not yet name it. I walked to my office carrying nothing but the laptop and the folder I had used for years. Clause 27B had been activated. Gravel had revealed the truth. The board and HR had confronted the evidence. The ripple had become a wave. Today, it would reach every corner. I passed Sienna in the hallway. Her usual confidence had dissolved into precise movements and strained calm. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes searching for a clue, a weakness. She found none. I returned a small, polite nod, letting the silence speak for me. At my desk, I opened the laptop one last time to review the files. Every log, every email, every screenshot confirmed what I already knew. The organization could no longer deny reality. The truth, meticulously preserved, was undeniable. Notifications buzzed. Finance confirmed the final numbers. Legal acknowledged the binding clause. HR scrambled to adjust processes and prepare communications for the board. Every action reinforced the inevitability I had orchestrated. I leaned back in my chair and let the calm settle over me. 17 years of work, carefully documented, prepared, and preserved, had culminated in this moment. The chain reaction I had set in motion was unstoppable. My phone buzzed with a message from the insider, the assistant who had guided the evidence to the right eyes. "Well done," it read. No signature, just acknowledgement. I allowed myself a faint smile. Patience and timing had been worth it. The board convened, reviewing the materials I had preserved and the evidence now circulating. Discussions were urgent, strategic, but grounded in fact. No narrative could override documented truth. The first acknowledgments were made. Accountability had begun. I walked through the office, passing teams who had once watched silently, uncertain of their place. Their eyes now held respect, curiosity, and cautious admiration. They had observed the culmination of preparation and evidence, and they understood the power of careful patience. At mid-morning, Sienna's office door opened, and she emerged, tablet in hand, visibly shaken but attempting composure. She approached me. "Cameron," she said, voice even but brittle, "we will need your guidance to manage the transition." I studied her carefully. Guidance? In this case, guidance would mean confirming the inevitability of her decisions. I nodded, measured. "Yes," I said, "I will assist where necessary. The rest is yours to reconcile." She swallowed, knowing the balance of power had shifted. She had underestimated the persistence, foresight, and preparation of someone she thought could be quietly removed. Later, in a private meeting, I spoke with the board. The evidence, the contracts, and the gravel files were presented. Questions arose, clarifications sought. I responded with precision, calmly. No emotion, only facts. The clarity of preparation made negotiation unnecessary. By noon, communications had begun. HR circulated updates acknowledging the accelerated equity and the enforceable rights I had claimed. The board issued notices to adjust responsibilities and acknowledge the oversight. Sienna and the council were forced to reconcile with reality. I took a moment to step out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The sun glittered off the river, flowing relentlessly, unbothered by the human chaos below. I exhaled slowly. Freedom, recognition, and fairness had been restored, not through confrontation or conflict, but through preparation, patience, and precise execution. I thought about the years that had passed, the nights spent debugging, documenting, preserving, and observing. Every moment of diligence had led to this. Every small action, unnoticed at the time, had created the foundation for justice. The assistant who had acted with courage and foresight now approached. No words were necessary. We both understood the significance. The dominoes had fallen, and every piece had landed as intended. By mid-afternoon, the office settled into a new rhythm. Respect for diligence, experience, and preparation had replaced uncertainty and control. People moved with acknowledgement of the truth. Decisions were made with clarity. Structures had adjusted to the reality that no action against truth could succeed indefinitely. I returned to my desk and opened the contract once more. Clause 27B, gravel, and every supporting document, proof that preparation and patience always carry weight. I smiled, not triumphantly, not arrogantly. Calmly, the narrative had unfolded exactly as planned. Tomorrow, new opportunities awaited. Heliction had learned, whether willingly or unwillingly, the cost of attempting to erase what was meticulously preserved. I had done my part. Now it was time to step forward. The afternoon light softened through the windows, casting warm reflections across the office floors. The tension that had gripped the building earlier had eased, replaced with a quiet acknowledgement. Everyone had begun to realize the scope of what had transpired. Decisions were no longer guided by fear or assumptions, but by evidence, contracts, and recorded truth. I sat at my desk, laptop closed, folder beside me. Gravel and Clause 27B had served their purpose. The board had accepted the accelerated equity, HR had adjusted processes, and Sienna had finally acknowledged her lack of control. The ripple had become a wave. The story had told itself. I leaned back and let myself breathe. 17 years of careful observation, patient documentation, and precise preparation had culminated in this moment. I had acted with foresight, guided by law, logic, and the subtle support of the insider who had chosen integrity over loyalty to power. Messages began to flow in. From legal, confirming final compliance. From finance, verifying the last transfers. From my team, expressing quiet relief. Their diligence had been essential. They had executed the plan flawlessly, documenting and observing as instructed. Their work ensured the truth remained intact and undeniable. I glanced toward the assistant, the one who had acted decisively yet quietly to tip the balance. Our eyes met briefly. No words were necessary. The acknowledgement was mutual. Courage, discretion, and timing had made all the difference. Without him, the chain reaction might have been delayed. With him, the inevitable had become reality. Sienna approached once more, her movements careful, measured. She spoke softly, as if negotiating for lost time. "Cameron," she said, "we will need your cooperation to navigate this transition." I nodded. Cooperation did not mean surrender. It meant guiding the resolution according to evidence and legality, ensuring that every step aligned with truth. "Yes," I said, "I will assist where necessary. Beyond that, the responsibility is yours." The building had changed. Its atmosphere was lighter now, honest. The people moved differently, with awareness and respect for diligence and preparation. No longer would attempts to erase history or manipulate reality go unnoticed. The precedent had been set. I stood and walked to the balcony. Below, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the silent upheaval that had taken place within these walls. The river sparkled under the late afternoon sun, relentless, unbothered by human drama. I took a deep breath, letting the calm settle over me. The story had been told precisely as intended. Clause 27B had activated. Gravel had revealed the truth. The insider had acted courageously. The council, HR, and the board had acknowledged reality. And through it all, I had remained patient, precise, and prepared. I reflected on the years spent documenting, observing, preserving, and preparing. Every small action, every careful note, every log meticulously saved had contributed to this outcome. The patience had been worth it. The preparation had been essential. I returned to my desk, looking once more at the folder that had carried the culmination of my efforts. I smiled faintly. Not in triumph, not in arrogance, but in quiet satisfaction. The narrative had unfolded according to plan. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities. Heliction had learned, whether willingly or not, that truth, diligence, and preparation could not be erased. I had acted, the evidence was undeniable, and the results were irreversible. I closed my eyes briefly, savoring the calm. The story had ended. The ripple had become a wave. And I, having preserved every word, every action, every proof, was ready to step forward into what came next. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and alive. Inside, a quiet revolution had reshaped the organization. I had done what needed to be done. The rest was now in the hands of those who would have to live with the truth. I rose, folder in hand, and walked out of the office. Each step felt lighter than it had in years. Clause 27B had secured justice. The insider had ensured clarity. Preparation had created inevitability. And I was ready for the next chapter, fully aware that patience, precision, and timing were always the keys to victory.